Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast. Gareth here. What a show we have for you this time around. We have an IR35 special with Dave Chaplin, who is the founder and owner of IR35 Shield and Contractor Calculator. Dave is an experienced contractor who has a multitude of knowledge around the IR35 legislation since it was initially conceived back in 1999. He's been a prominent campaigner to in terms of the opposition to IR35, and has been very vocal online and also in terms of active campaigns in Westminster more recently. His depth of knowledge around the legislation is very impressive, and he gives us some excellent advice in a number of areas, and his opinions are very well-founded and well thought out. So yeah, it's a really enjoyable and insightful interview. I hope you enjoy this one. I certainly enjoyed doing it. I give you Dave Chaplin. Hi, first of all, hi Dave. Thank you for coming on the show. I know you're a very busy chap, especially at the moment. I've seen you on LinkedIn. You've been very active recently. The first thing I want to ask you is, how did it go in Westminster last week? The Chancellor resigned the next day, so a resounding success.
Dude, I don't think that was anything to do with us. So it's interesting to read the reporting on the protest, because the numbers seem to build up quite quickly over time. Some people said there were 150 there, but when we got to the Treasury, we think there were more sort of 300 or 400 people there. So it was a very, very good response. And what was particularly good is when we went into the Houses of Parliament and we went into the Macmillan room that Tim Farron had booked for us, and we managed to engage with 50 MPs. So lots of them coming to listen, to hear the arguments for and against, and really engage with the debate. So I think the demonstration, essentially it's a lobby day really rather than a demonstration. I think it went very well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there was lots of people there. I was watching it on LinkedIn. I was watching the Twitter updates. It seemed to go really well. So, it's all about awareness, I think, Dave, isn't it? It's all about...
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so essentially the problem we see is it's all based around the behavioural effect of this new legislation. The concept of deemed employment is an invention by HMRC, was then by the Inland Revenue, that was invented 20 years ago. We don't think it's ever worked. We still don't think it works. It creates so much uncertainty in the tax system, and the tax system is something where people need certainty in order to manage their businesses. So with the massive uncertainty, we're starting to see clients take quite drastic action by simply banning their contractors, issuing terminations to all of them to say you're all out the door at the end of February, although that's now changed to the end of March based on the recent update. So it's really the behavioural effect that we're focused on. If it was simple, it would have been done years ago, and it's just not simple. And it's causing the market considerable damage. If they could just pick out the individuals and the sectors where there are those problems of deemed employment, where there is abuse of the tax system, that would be great. But we're in the situation now where it's a bit throwing baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. So before we deep dive into this too much, I just wanted to find out a little bit about your background. And first of all, how did you become a contractor?
Well, I became a contractor in 1997. Some people might remember there was something called Microsoft Access, a database, and I got particularly good at that. And in that era, there was a massive demand for contractors. It really built up. The JobServe website came online for the first time. And it was possible then for contractors to essentially cut out the middleman and no longer work for consultancies and body shops and go direct to clients via the agencies. And it was at that point, with the huge demand, that most people who were techies in that era went contracting.
did you worked in the city for quite a while, I think, didn't you?
Yes, I started on Microsoft Access. I then moved on to Visual Basic and then eventually C Sharp. My technology space was, my area was in, crikey, then it was called extreme programming, which then morphed into agile software development. It used to be called something called test-first programming. And so I was into this whole niche area of software process. And I used to lead teams of developers to build financial applications. For the banks, we built the online bank that came together with, it was brought together by HSBC and Merrill Lynch. I was part of that team. After that, then we had the dot-com crash, and I took a year off. And after earning lots of money, I went around Asia, not on a shoestring, and then came back and I did some more work for Freshfields, the law firm, and we were trying to automate some of their challenges in due diligence. So yeah, I've done all sorts really. And then in 2004, I went full-time with the Contractor Calculator website. I've been working on that for 5 years.
Talk us about how you got involved with the opposition to IR35. I know it got announced in 1999. Just talk us through that period from 99 up to the present and what you've sort of...
Sure. So I think it was eventually around November 1999 when it was announced it would be going ahead in April 2000. So at that point, we're now in the era where there weren't actually many websites. We were all application developers on Windows, so I decided to build a web application to help people understand what the financial impact for them would be if they were caught by IR35, or the phrase now is saying that you're inside IR35. So with my accounting and maths background, and also with help from my brother who is an accountant, we put together a spreadsheet, and then I turned that into programming code and built my first website over the weekend. At the time, that was called IR35calc.co.uk, and that enabled everybody to understand where they would sit if they were caught by the legislation.
That's pretty handy, your brother being an accountant then. I'm sure that served you well when you were trying to set up Contractor Calculator. Absolutely.
I mean, I did A-level accounts as well, and it's just tax maths, really. It's not that tough. So I did a degree in mathematics at Bristol, and then I went into an area for my master's called operational research, which is essentially algorithm design. I even went for a job after my master's to work for the Minister of Defence to program war game simulations, which I thought might have been quite interesting. I mean, in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't get the job. I'm not sure I could sleep at night doing something like that. And like many of us in that era, who had essentially we'd all been programming since we were kids, we just all fell into IT. I mean, I've been programming since the age of 12 when a Commodore 64 came out. So I'd already had sort of 10 years experience of programming and playing around, and we all just ended up as programmers.
Yeah, I had a Commodore 64 myself. I thought it was the best thing ever, but then I was annoyed with my parents because they wouldn't buy me the Commodore Amiga, which was the next one after it, because it cost a fortune. What I'm keen to know, Dave, is in a succinct way, I suppose, what your primary concerns are in terms of the changes to the off-payroll regulations. What impact do you think it's going to have on the market over the next couple of months?
So I think the reforms, I don't like to use the word reform because that sounds like something positive, but the new legislation is going to, I've sort of said it's going to pour glue on the flexible workforce. Many businesses, when they're fast growing, they need to be able to hire people on demand in a frictionless and risk-free manner to help them grow their businesses. Now, to assess somebody to see whether they're inside or outside of IR35 is extremely complex and involves understanding employment case law. That's not something you can learn overnight. So it puts a tremendous amount of risk on those companies who then need to hire contractors on a risk-free basis. The last thing you want if you're a growing company is to have a huge amount of tax risk sitting on your balance sheet, particularly if you're looking for investment. You might be looking for angel investment, or you might be past that and going further. But when the firm does a due diligence on you and sees that you've been hiring contractors for many years, then they might consider your valuation to be much lower than it is because your firm has all that historic tax risk. So from a sort of a mergers and acquisitions and investment standpoint, this is a really, really bad idea for UK PLC because it just puts all of that risk onto those companies.
Yeah. So one thing I've heard you talk about in the past is obviously getting HMRC to commit to a situation whereby they kind of cross off the messy history of this in each company. And then obviously we set some sort of measures for the future.
Yes.
Do you think we're closer to achieving that goal? Especially with the introduction of a new chancellor now, and I think you've really done well to get this narrative out there. Do you think we're closer to getting them to listen to this?
They are definitely listening. I was involved in a meeting with the Financial Secretary of the Treasury a few weeks ago. I can't go into all of the details. We're meeting MPs. They are listening. That doesn't necessarily mean there will be change, but they are listening to all of the balanced arguments, and they understand that the current situation isn't great and it is causing problems and it is damaging the workforce. They can see that the behavioural effect isn't really quite what they expected and what they wanted to see. In terms of the call for an amnesty, what I'm asking them to do is essentially put into legislation what they've already promised. HMRC have released guidance that says that they don't plan to investigate contractors historically unless they suspect that there has been any level of fraud. Now,
where did this promise come from? Who promised this?
The HMRC promised that recently. It was written into some recent guidance that came out, I think it was last week or the week before. The problem we're seeing is that contractors who are an existing client, and let's say they are currently outside IR35, they're assessed that way, they've had independent advice, and that's how they've been operating. As far as they're concerned, they are compliant. Well, some companies, particularly the larger ones, they just don't want to take on any of this tax risk. So they've decided to have a blanket policy of no more personal service companies, no contractors using limited companies. They will only hire people on payroll. Mm-hmm. Now, that comes with lots of consequences for all parties concerned. The company itself will probably find that their costs will go up because they're going to have to pay more to attract the best talents. That it is what it is. They just have to accept that. But the other unintended consequence is that those contractors who feel that they have been behaving compliantly, if they stay at that particular client and the client has said to them, no, you're going on payroll, their concern is that that will fare badly for them in the event that HMRC came after them for previous year's tax, which they're perfectly entitled to do. An investigation can go back 4 years under normal circumstances, or can extend to 6 years if they've been careless. In this instance, you would probably say they haven't been careless because they've had some sort of external evaluation of their status. But just to defend an IR35 investigation, it can cost you in the region of £30,000. So if you're not insured, then that seems to be particularly unfair. And there's no reason why HMRC can just form an opinion and then you have to defend yourself, which means going to tribunal. That seems particularly unfair. So for those groups of people that haven't been careless, they have taken good advice, they feel that their status should be outside, I think for those ones, there just needs to be an amnesty to say, okay, we're not worried about you. But for those that have done nothing, for those that have maybe taken advice and were told they're inside and haven't paid the taxes, well, that takes you into the area where there's perhaps been negligence, and seems fair that HMRC should still be able to chase those people. And that's essentially what they're saying in their guidance. Unfortunately, no one trusts HMRC. So I'm just saying, put your promise into statute. It's really quite simple.
You talked about companies who are not prepared for this. What kind of percentage of the market are we talking about here, Dave, in terms of who are really prepared for this?
I guess it depends how
percentage of who are not prepared for it is probably a better.
Yeah. The sort of numbers being bandied about are about half of the companies aren't prepared. So there are 60,000 businesses that are in scope because they're medium or large. Yeah, it's about half of them, people are saying.
You're referring to the small company exemption there, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know how many small companies there are in the UK, but when you look at the impact statement released by HMRC as to which companies will be affected by this, it says there's 60,000 businesses that are medium to large and that there are 20,000 agencies. Ironically, whilst there's the small companies exemption for the companies who aren't in scope, of those 20,000 agencies, 68% of them are actually small companies between 0 and 9 employees. So whilst they've tried to take the burden away from the small companies because they can't cope with the administrative burden, they haven't done that to the agencies. So the agencies are having a really hard time with this. They are essentially in the middle of a toxic situation between the clients and the contractors and trying to play referee. On top of that, the agencies are being landed with a tax risk based on a decision that they didn't even make, which does seem entirely unfair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think a lot of the problems are because of an overreaction by companies? Do you think, where there could be some subtle changes to the way they procure these people, or do you think it's justified?
I think it's a considered reaction. I think the way they've decided to approach this is to recognise that for them, when they have that many contractors with so many diverse roles in the company, the contractors are therefore that they've decided that it might be better to just press the reset button, clear everybody out, and then just start again. That's one potential driver. The other one is that they will have lots of contractors that are probably inside IR35. Typically, I've worked in banks, and you do have some that have been there for years, and you would argue, yes, potentially if they were investigated, they would be caught. So probably the last thing a bank wants to do is to give a contractor lots of reasons to take them to an employment tribunal.
Yeah.
So it's sort of press the reset button and start again, really, for those ones, because they find the problem too difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was talking to a procurement lead of a large government department a couple of months back, and he felt that companies were taking the sort of the path of least resistance on this, and it was just a lot easier to get rid of a load of contractors than it was to sort of justify any risk to the board that they may carry if they keep hold of them. You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
Reprocuring people is hard work. People are afraid. Maybe some people are afraid of A, the risk, and B, the hard work. So I think there's a bit of that going on as well. There's a bit of everything going on, really, David.
Yeah. The amount of work that needs to go into the transitional phase is certainly more than if you just press the reset button and start it again. The challenge there, though, and the backlash that large firms are getting is that they've sort of adopted a position of saying, we're not going to spend any more money on contractors. If you want to stay, you're going to get a 25% pay cut and you need to go on payroll. That's not really working very well. And we're starting to see large numbers of contractors form collectives and collectively bargain and say, well, sorry, we're not taking this type of pay cut. We will stay, but we want this. So, it's what you would expect, right? For people to do that. The whole thing is a renegotiation. It's not working out well for any companies, really, that have adopted the blanket policy approach. They're bound to get backlash and pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you accept then that there is a part of the professional subcontractor market whereby these individuals are essentially like PAYEs, and you know they are like basically employees, but they're obviously procured through contractor agreements, when they probably should be paying PAYE equivalent tax. And what I'm saying, Dave, is how do we tread that line? There's a lot of people who are clearly contractors. There are a lot of people who are clearly not contractors, but are engaged as contractors. How do, it's really messy, isn't it? How do we tread that line?
It's very messy. I mean, for years we've been saying that probably 30% of contractors are definitely outside, 30% are probably inside, and then you've got this 40% in the middle of the grey area where you need to decide which way they're going to go. And I would say that situation still remains. Everybody has probably come across a contractor in a company that's been there for absolutely years and is part of the furniture. Now, of those ones who are essentially in deemed employment as defined, then you've got two types of those. You've got the ones that are probably not being paid market rate. They are probably costing the company similar amount of money compared to hiring an equivalent permanent employee. So somewhere tax is essentially being avoided, fair cop. It's going on. You also have to say, well, that contractor doesn't get any employment rights and so on and so on. But in terms of a percentage of the cost of the transaction that is being taken as tax, the transaction where the contractor is engaged is less than where the permanent employee is engaged. And that's because it all comes down to secondary class one, national insurance contributions, also known as employers' NI. So you've got those ones, they would be your classic deemed employees. You've then got your other ones where they might be essentially deemed employees, but they're still getting paid far more than if they were a permanent employee. I mean, typically when I hire IT contractors, I pay them about double what I have to pay my permanent employees. And that's quite typical in the IT market. Well, if you're a company and you've been hiring essentially overpaid deemed employees for years and years and years, then you have to ask yourself the question, why on earth have you been doing that? And why didn't you try and hire permanent employees? It could be a supply and demand problem, perhaps. But then on top of that, you then have to say to yourself, well, so what? So what? The government is getting a smaller slice of a much larger pie. And by turning these people into permanent employees where they get paid much less, they get less money in tax revenue. So why would you do that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It seems a bit crazy, really, doesn't it? When you
it's bonkers
like that. I wanted to ask you, Dave, are you aware of a template internationally, another country, maybe in Europe or something, who get this right? I know that they're quite, from my personal experience, they seem to be quite on top of this situation in the Netherlands, for example. I don't know if you're aware, but are there any other countries who you think have dealt with this in a very admirable way and seem to be quite close to a perfect situation?
I haven't researched this for a few years now, but the last time we looked at it, it's all a bit of a mess wherever you look, really. Where there are countries where the tax differential is significantly different, whether you hire someone self-employed or employed, this problem exists, and you could argue that there is some abuse of the tax system. And the abuse typically happens down the lower end of the pay scale, where there's no bargaining power, and the worker is forced to use a limited company in order to get work. So we'd call that false self-employment. As you move up the pay scale, the bargaining power tends to equalise a bit more between the client and the contractor, and very much so in some areas when you're getting into 4 figures a day, the contractor's holding all the cards. And in those sorts of zones, who cares whether they're, behaving like an employee or not? The government's earning so much money, and they're being paid far more than their permanent counterparts. So let them get on with it. What we do see, going back to the international question, is the only place this really gets solved, and the only way it gets solved, is when they remove the differential between the tax rates between self-employed and employed. To give you an example of how silly this is, and remember that deemed employment is an invention, it's not a real thing, it's an invention. If the tax for hiring somebody as an employee was much less than if you hired someone self-employed, as in we reverse everything, there would probably be an invention by HMRC called disguised businesses, where they would come into companies and say, you're not really an employee, you're really a business. You need to pay more tax. So the thing is a contrived invention.
It's such a complex area. It's so difficult to separate, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the problem that Chancellor after Chancellor has faced, and HMRC has obviously been wrestling with this for a while. But obviously, I think we're in agreement that they just balanced in the wrong way at the moment. What do you think? Going back to business owners, then, if because obviously we're talking to business owners here. Do you IR35 Shield? I know you look at it generally in terms of from the contractor perspective and advising them with a calculator and so on and so forth. Do you guys have a model contract for time and materials, resources, or maybe something in between time and materials and statement of work that you would recommend, or do you have your own model contract for engaging contingent workers at all?
Yes, we do. We have one on the site that is available for businesses or individual contractors. There's lots of these contracts around. They're not difficult to get hold of. They've been around for years. You just need to get one that's sort of updated with the most recent case law. It's actually very easy to hire someone on an outside IR35 basis and not have to worry about the tax risk. This isn't a difficult thing to do. Unfortunately, there's lots of fear and scaremongering in the market that says that it is, but it isn't. Courts have to respect the contracts that have been entered into in good faith. And if the expressed written contract is sound and all parties agree with it, and they all put their hand up in court and say, yes, that's how we decided to do things, it's very difficult for HMRC to argue, no, actually, they're really an employee. The problems tend to arise when there are lazily drawn contracts, or contracts that are actually a complete work of fiction, and the person really is a deemed employee. If you're hiring someone to come in and work on a project and the contracts are sound, there really should be nothing to worry about.
No, absolutely agreed. So let me put you in the hot seat then, Dave. Okay, if you were coming in as the new Chancellor right now, I think it's Mr. Sunak, what would you do? What action would you take?
Well, he's going to have to be quite brave if he decides to do a U-turn on this one. I think they definitely need to delay, and then they need to sit down with all parties and work out how they're going to solve this, because the current situation is turning into quite the mess. There's a real storm brewing. We're just starting to see the results of contractors pushing back against firms that aren't prepared to give them fair tax treatment. So I don't think a delay is a U-turn. A U-turn would be a complete cancellation. Now, some have said they think that's quite unlikely given how far we've come, in which case, if there's some way in which they could bring about some sort of soft landing, that would be useful. What that means in terms of legislation, who knows? That's anyone's guess. The idea of an amnesty would help people just to start with. It might keep contractors working at their existing clients. But really, I think they need to pause on this one. It's not working. And if this happens on April the 6th, I think we're going to find lots of firms very unhappy with the behavioural effect of this legislation coming in.
What other advice would you give to an owner of a medium-sized consultancy or a company who supplies to government or the private sector in terms of the way they procure contractors?
I would say to firms that are needing to engage with the new legislation, they should take advice from firms that don't really have a vested interest in whether contractors are hired inside or outside IR35. They should potentially engage with agencies and put an agency in the chain, because from a structural viewpoint, that makes the agency the fee payer, who will then be bearing more of the tax risk. And the agency should be able to help them with compliance as well. Lots of the agencies are finding that this is a bit of an opportunity for them in a way. Sounds a bit perverse, but those agencies that are ahead of the game and can help the clients engage better, they will take more market share. So if you choose the right agency that's really up to speed, that could give you a market edge. Again, if you're a company that does hire contractors and some of your competitors are ones that aren't up to speed on this, then they're going to be having to pay more money to access the same talent that you can if you're still able to hire contractors on an outside IR35 basis. So again, it's like your competition have all been shot in the foot if you're the one that still knows how to run down the road and hire contractors correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great stuff. Well, what's next for you then, Dave? Well, you've got a bit of a 6-week run up now to the legislation coming into play. What's on the agenda for you?
Well, we're hoping to see the results of the review within the next week or so. There is also the inquiry being done by the Lords Finance Bill Subcommittee. It'll be interesting to see what they come out with. They'll be making recommendations to the Treasury and government on how to move forward with this reform. Hopefully they will come up with some good recommendations. Hopefully the recommendation will be to not do it at all.
We can all hope.
We shall see. So I think the next 2 or 3 weeks are going to be absolutely crucial, particularly on the lobbying front. We would certainly encourage all contractors and definitely business owners to visit their MPs face to face and explain to them the impact it's having on their business, and to ask for further delay, really, so that firms get another year to prepare. And hopefully during that next year, we would have more opportunity to try and smooth the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk us through IR35 Shield then and the products that you offer to business owners.
Sure. So we first looked at building a status determination tool about 10 years ago, and it sat inside the website Contractor Calculator. And at the time there, it consisted of about 50 questions. Now, when it was announced that it would come out into the public sector, we decided to package that assessment tool up into something that is now called IR35 Shield. And we rebuilt the whole thing at scratch. We had to update it with all the latest case law, and we ended up expanding it to over 100 questions. So we had to, my thing is algorithm design and mathematics and the case law. So we reverse engineered all of the case law to date, and made sure that we built a tool that would give the right answer for all of the existing cases. Then we perceived that there would be a problem with volume in the market because there simply aren't enough people that have enough in-depth knowledge of the case law to be able to assess essentially 500,000 contractors. So we built the service in the cloud, and we can now offer that to companies to be able to assess on a bulk basis. We built and invented something called collaborative assessments, whereby 2/3 of the assessment are already answered up front based on the contractual conditions and what the hiring manager says, so that we just have to spend another 5 minutes just gathering data from the contractor, and then we can instantly give a determination. So it's about dealing with the volume and scale and speed and trying to get rid of all of that extra friction in the flexible economy that this legislation essentially puts there. So it's really just trying to enable clients to be able to just carry on working business as usual. Of course, there are contractors that we are finding that are inside IR35, which is not the most pleasant part of running IR35 Shield, telling people the bad news, but we are also able to advise clients how to engage contractors on an outside IR35 basis. So it's really just compliance. We're just trying to help people be compliant, really, and do it in a most cost-effective and efficient manner.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, it's ir35shield.co.uk. You obviously, I think you've got a contact us thing on there if people want more information on that.
Sure. Yeah.
It looks like a really comprehensive tool, and it looks really impartial, and it's obviously backed up with a long history, given your involvement in this space since the beginning. So brilliant. Well, thanks, Dave. I really appreciate that. We've gone considerably over, so I do apologise. Get carried away talking about these things, but thanks for your time and your input. It's much appreciated. We will see how it materialises over the next 6 weeks. But good luck with your campaign, and good luck with your endeavours. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Gareth. Good to speak to you. Good luck.